Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune. So usually when I sit down to write a review, I have a pretty solid idea in my head of exactly what I want to say. But with this one, not so much. I knew that I loved the book, and I knew that there were certain themes that I definitely wanted to address, but I still wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to say about those themes. So I will admit this one gets a little bit messy. So In the Lives of Puppets is the story of Victor, a young man who lives with his father, Geo, a robot vacuum named Rambo, and a medical android named Nurse Ratched in the middle of the forest. They are the only people, or really androids, he has ever seen. Until the day a new batch of junk is dumped in the salvage yard near their home. It is all decommissioned androids, but in the middle of this pile of limbs and torsos, Victor finds an android that still has a spark of life in him. He finds himself strangely drawn to this machine, and so Victor hauls him back home and repairs him, giving him a heart-shaped power source. But when this salvaged machine wakes, it will set off a cascade of events that will change Victor's life and possibly the future of the world. So, this is a whimsical post-apocalyptic fantasy sci-fi asexual love story, which is just not something you get to say very often. One of the big things that I know I want to talk about in this review is how the hell TJ Klune manages to write with such a sweet, whimsical tone when he has characters that regularly threaten each other with murder. I've now read 2 of his books, and both feature characters that should come across as mean to downright evil, but instead they read as really sweet and likable. His books have these really dark and disturbing concepts, world building, and themes, but they feel like fairy tales. Hell, this book features a couple of characters who participated in a genocide. About half of Nurse Ratched's dialogue is her talking about killing Rambo, and one character is even jokingly just named Hysterically Angry Puppet. But it all comes across as gentle, loving, and kind. This book features heavy themes of violence and the impossibility of forgiveness, the drive and failure to be better than those that came before us, and how memories or lack thereof shape identity, the impossibility of letting go of the past, but also the impossibility of turning back the clock. And yet, even with all these heavy adult themes, it feels childlike and gentle. And my first instinct is to say that that comes from the fact that there's a simplicity to Klune's writing that gives it a sort of younger vibe, that allows us to feel safe and disconnected from these heavy, big themes. Klune tends to write with like a focus on more simplistic and straightforward grammar and syntax. And this childlike tone makes the characters intrinsically feel less serious. When Nurse Ratched is threatening Rambo, it feels like when you hear a 5-year-old threaten to beat up his dad. It's sort of cute. But the problem with that is that there are plenty of more complex passages in this book. While Klune is definitely not the kind of author that I need to keep my phone handy next to me so I can look up words in a dictionary every couple of chapters, his vocabulary is not childish. And there's an elegance and depth to his writing that counters that fairy tale childishness. And so my next instinct to suggest that maybe the extreme whimsy comes from the simple, almost cartoony characters. And yeah, Rambo is sort of reminiscent of the mascot character you see in a lot of kids' movies. He's a bit like Olaf from Frozen. He's unendingly optimistic, a bit dumb with no verbal filter. But the thing is, he also has some beautiful moments of self-reflection and introduces some of the more complex questions of what separates sentience from non-sentience, what separates human emotion from simple sensation, and what separates the soul from the mind. And on that note, yeah, this is one of the core questions of this book, and it hits heavy in a post-chat GPT, screenwriters and actors striking against being replaced with AI, authors suing tech companies for scraping their work to feed to AI world. And when I first started reading this book, I had a moment when I stopped and considered putting it down for a while, like months or years, because I have a lot of feels about AI at the moment. And I was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to lose myself in the story with those thoughts in the back of my mind. But I'm glad I read on. Because even though, yeah, a lot of this book is looking at looking at the idea of artificial intelligence that replaced humanity, in a weird way, that's not what the book is really focusing on. That's just sort of the background. The crux of the story is, at what point do these intelligent machines with personalities evolve to the point of having, for lack of a better word, souls? And that's a theme I always find really fascinating. Like, I love me stories of androids and robots that just stop being machines and start being people. And what does that mean? When does it happen? Where does it happen? How does it happen? And in this book, the machines are shown as sort of just naturally evolving to have what we would understand as personalities, emotions, and, yeah, souls. Even those that are meant to be the least human, the ones that are limited and focused on their utility-based programming, they all have obvious, quirky personalities. Not all of them are likable, but they are all characters. They can feel betrayed, they can have sexual urges, they can feel unfulfilled, and they can care about each other, about history, about collecting shiny things. They can act in ways that we would usually describe as human. And, like, as a reader, and specifically a reader who really focuses on stories and characters, I see the humanity of the machines as an inherent good to the story. It just makes it more immersive, enjoyable, and readable book. But a lot of this book is also built around the notion that these machines that dream, that love, that have a heart are special and different. That they are the ones who have grown past what they were built for. And is that sort of undercut when we see all the other machines acting rather human as well? I personally don't think so. I think that that's part of the point of what's going on here, that at first we think they are different because they have a heart, but truthfully they were already different before they got a heart, and all of the machines are on the verge of being more than what they were built to do, and they all just need a chance to experience existence outside of their utility, which makes the ending of this book insanely hopeful. But this was all a sidetrack, I got distracted. I was still trying to put my finger on what makes this book so damn whimsical. My next thought was that maybe it was because of the way Klune paints the world. We get these big, broad strokes focused on beautiful, fairy tale-like settings, interspersed with insanely precise, magical details. We start our story in this old-growth forest verged on by a giant scrapyard. We get tree houses and floating houses and towers so tall the tops disappear into the clouds. And we get details like a flower growing in the middle of an abandoned house with one ray of sunlight framing it. We get a tree covered in monarch butterflies. We get the texture of wood and the smell of metal. And all of that feels magical. All that also did a great job of putting us into Victor's perspective. It's not directly stated in the text that Vic is neurodivergent, but he definitely has sensory issues. And I've never read a better representation of what it feels like to be in sensory overload. And like, that's not something that happens to me often, but I have had that experience. And I've just never really read any book that really captures that feeling of there being so much too much going on. And that feeling of being completely incapable of narrowing your focus in on what exactly is important to look at. But in the end, I think the thing that really is the biggest building block of the intense whimsy in this book is the overall hopeful tone. It feels weird to say this about a book that is a post-apocalyptic novel, where machines have risen up to kill humanity, to say that that could be hopeful, but it is. And I really love the fact that it avoided the more obvious cliche hopeful ideals. Like, there is no one last chance to rebuild the world as it was before. There's no last lingering shot on, like, a flower sprouting from a wasteland. No, the hope here is not that there will be some magical return to as it was before. The hope is in the growth. It's in the possibility of forgiveness, of moving forward. It's accepting that the past is over, but the future could be something different, but good as well. Maybe even better. Though also I do want to quickly say, there's an intense focus in this book on how the future is shaped by the past, and specifically how creations invariably end up mirroring their creators. Not completely, but there will always be something of the creator in the creation. Why do the machines have so many of the same desires and flaws as humanity? Because humanity built them in their own image, and that image still shapes them centuries after humans have stopped being involved in their evolution. And that is both the flaw and the hope for the future. But this has been way too much unnecessary overthinking about whimsy. I also want to take a moment to talk about how cute the romance is in this book. I love the fact that Victor is asexual, and specifically he's an awkward, sex-averse person, but he still gets a love story. And I sort of love the fact that the robots, almost all across the board, are more sexual than our human protagonist. It's just a lovely contradiction to what it's often portrayed as. Also, I mentioned that one of the heavier themes in this book is how memory and lack thereof make us, change us, and allow us to become someone new. But I do want to talk a bit more about that. This book asks, are you still the same person who did horrible things, even if you don't remember and would not do them again? What if you do remember? Can you change with that weight on your shoulders? When can you move on? Ask for forgiveness. When might you deserve forgiveness? When might you deserve love? And I love the fact that this book doesn't go in for easy answers on this. I was just watching the series finale of Doctor Who Series 3 with a friend a couple of days ago, and frankly, that's a terrible finale. Like, it's awful. But I think one of its biggest flaws, beyond the incredibly bad special effect choices, was the fact that everything was just basically undone at the end. Like, we literally just spin back the clock, and only like 6 people will ever remember anything happened. And that felt like such a fucking cop-out. But this book manages to find a happy ending that still acknowledges the horrors of what happened to the characters and the world. Which is the kind of ending that occasionally leaves me feeling melancholy, but will stick with me and feel so much more fulfilling than something that is pure joy and perfect happiness. I do also want to quickly warn you that there is some stuff in this book with a parent not remembering their child, which will probably hit anyone who is dealing with dementia in a loved one very hard. So just be aware before you read this, if that's something that's going to negatively impact your emotions, maybe hold off a bit. But even in that, there is hope in this book. I want to offer you a specific quote from the last page of the damn book, and before you get too worried, there are no serious spoilers here unless you count the fact that the protagonist survives as a spoiler. But the quote is, "Be it man or machine," Victor thought, "to love something meant loving the ghost inside, to be haunted by it." And that is somehow a very hopeful line. There is pain and selfishness in that love, but it is also where the soul, where humanity and hope lives. But yeah, I really liked this book, though it made me cry and made me ache like my insides were full of bad garbage, which is a line you'll understand when you read this book, which I encourage you to do, 'cause it's good.